of the William Patterson Broadcast Network, Brave New Radio.
Brave New Radio. Give us your tired, your poor, your hungry, your rockers, your punks, your freaks, your geeks, your Greeks, your party animals, your gangsters, your commuters, your residents, your students, your alums, your lawyers, your truckers, your calls, your tweets. And we'll give you rock, classic, indie, punk, alternative, easy, hard, raps, rhymes, mixes, and drops. We'll give you kick-ass music because we're WPSC 88.7 FM, Brave New Radio. Sound good?
All right, good morning. I'm going to go ahead and give you the disclaimer. The views and opinions heard on this show are solely those of the hosts and guests. The views and opinions may or may not be shared by William Patterson University station owner or any of the management. And now here's your program, which is none other than The Reading Circle with Marc Medley. Well, good morning, good morning. Good morning to you, all of my reading connoisseurs, all of my book-loving connoisseurs. Good morning and welcome to another edition of The Reading Circle with Marc Medley. And I am your host. I'll be with you for the next 3 hours. An hour or two or hour and a half or hour, whatever it takes. Part of that is our interview with our author, and then we transition on into the gospel music. So it's a total of 3 hours, however which way it flows, and I have the flexibility, so you never know. The entire interview may go to 3 hours. It has been done, but generally the interview will last anywhere from an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long it takes, depending on the situation and the conversation. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and start our usual ritual routine. If you've been listening any amount of time, you know that I have a ritual and routine on Saturday mornings. To all of you who may be tuned in for the first time, good morning and welcome to everyone on the social media sites, whether it be Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, any of the social media sites that folks may be following me as I've been advertising the show for the last 2 or 3 weeks now, and you've decided to tune in. Good morning to you. Well, we kick off with the weather. Then I read from 2 books because this is the Reading Circle. So I kick off actually reading 2 passages, then I introduce my guest and our interview goes underway from there. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and let you know what's going on with the weather here in the northern New Jersey area. Right now it is 62 degrees. We're expecting it to move to a high of 87, sunshine to start, then a few afternoon clouds, and then tonight it's going to be cloudy, a few clouds rather, low near 65, as I said, as we roll on into Sunday. Tomorrow, partly cloudy with afternoon showers, 60% chance of rain. We're going to have a high of 89, low of 67, partly to mostly cloudy Sunday night. Then on Monday, rolling back into the work week for those of you who are at work, scattered showers of thunderstorms, high of 88, low of 67. Scattered thunderstorms Monday night as well. Again, 60% chance of rain. And then on Tuesday, the sun pokes its head back out in full force. High of 93 with a low of 69. Mostly sunny skies. Look like it's going to be all of sunny skies. At a 10% chance of rain on Tuesday. Mostly clear Tuesday night. And then rounding out the forecast on a Wednesday, high of 95, a low of 70. Sunny, along with very few afternoon clouds on Wednesday. Well, that is the weather brought to you right here from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. And those of you know, there are two books that I start reading from that kicks the show off. The first is What Can Happen When We Pray, and the second is Until Today, and they are daily devotionals. So whatever occurs for that particular date, that's what I read. So today is July the 25th. And out of the book, What Can Happen When We Pray, it says, Criminal Justice. Loving God, you have ordained me to keep watch over part of your flock. Purify my mind, my heart, my spirit, and my intentions. I need to be cleansed by you so that I am not filled with human desire and ambition. This place of leadership is an honor that you can take away. Lord, help me to be worthy of this call. Now, that is very apropos for this morning. You'll see why shortly. One of the most profound statements I've ever heard is that our children are not ours, that they belong to God, and that we as parents are merely caretakers. I rebelled in spirit as I thought about changing diapers, trips to the doctor, and future costs to come. And yet it was true. Children are God's. The reality set in that as parents, we must answer to God for not taking good care of them. So most leaders answer to God for not taking good care of the flock. Manipulating people, taking advantage of them, and using them are all despicable actions in the sight of God. The flock belongs to God. Caretakers in the form of leaders, that includes educational leaders, must never forget that. That's for today, July the 25th, out of the book, What Can Happen When We Pray, from Iyanla Vanzant, her book for today, July the 25th. She now says, I will gain more understanding when I realize how I interpret what comes at me is a reflection of what is in me. Wow, again, speaking to me today. When something someone says or does upsets you, your upset is not about the other person. Feelings are triggered within you when an external source bumps into something that is already there. A self-inquiry will help you figure out what you are hiding that is being triggered by what you are experiencing. When you least expect it, truth will fly out of someone's mouth. That truth will burn a hole in your defenses, and chances are it is going to upset you. More than likely, you will direct your upset toward the person who released the truth you were denying, ignoring, or trying to excuse away. Oh my goodness. Well, we hope that doesn't happen this morning as we talk. If on the other hand you turn inward, then you are opening the door to a wholesome self-inquiry that will ultimately lead you to something that needs to be healed. A self-inquiry indicates your desire to take charge of rampant emotions so that you are not manipulated like a puppet by the things that go on around you. A self-inquiry begins the moment you experience the upset and ask the question, what am I feeling? Once you get the nature of the feeling, you must ask yourself, why am I feeling this? The answer is likely to be because so-and-so did such and such. Wrong. Do not lay your feelings in someone else's lap. Take charge. Call forth your issues so that they can be healed. Doing anything less will leave you out of touch with you and at the mercy of everything and everyone. Until today, you may have been tricked into believing that people can upset you. Just for today, be aware of what it is in you that triggers toxic emotions. If your trigger is pulled, run to the nearest quiet place and begin your healing process with a self-inquiry. Today, I'm devoted to healing myself of the need to react to the actions of others. And you'll see how both of these readings that we kicked off with will connect with our interview this morning as we talk through. The second one may appear or may actually be for a larger group, not just one person, as we begin to talk and have our discussion this morning, because my guest is Dr. H. Richard Milner IV. And he has written several books, but one of the ones we will be touching on this morning is Racing to Class. RAC, open paren, E, close paren, ING, to class. In other words, the focus or a major part of the discussion is going to be on race. That's why I was saying what I was saying about the self-inquiry. It may not just be for an individual, it may be for groups. H. Rich Milner IV is the Helen Faison Endowed Professor of Urban Education, Professor of Education, Professor of Sociology, Professor of Social Work, Professor of Africana Studies and Director of the Center for Urban Education at the University of Pittsburgh. His research, teaching, and policy interests are urban education, teacher education, African American literature, and the sociology of education. In particular, Professor Milner's research examines policies and practices that support teacher success in urban schools. Professor Milner's work has appeared in numerous journals, and he has published 5 books. His award-winning book, Start Where You Are But Don't Stay There, Understanding Diversity, Opportunity Gaps, and Teaching in Today's Classroom, Harvard Education Press 2010, represents years of research and development. In 2006, Professor Milner received an Early Career Award in recognition of his distinguished program of education research from the American Educational Research Association. Professor Milner has appeared on the top 200 EduScholar Public Presence ranking, published by Education Week, number 95 in 2013, 88 in 2014, and 89 in 2015. All right, now, in 2012, Professor Milner was honored with the Ohio State University College of Education and Human Ecology Distinguished Alumnus Award. Currently, he is editor-in-chief of Urban Education and the co-editor of the Handbook of Urban Education, published in Routledge Press in 2014. I also know he is a father. I also know he is a husband. And I know he's just an overall gentle giant. We had the opportunity to meet about a month ago, maybe 3 weeks or so ago now, where he did a presentation at a professional development session that I was in, sponsored by the Patterson Public School District. And I'd already heard about him prior to him coming because of colleagues that he has that I've also been working with, Rosita Apodaca and Glenn Nolly. They had already been raving about Dr. Milner before he even came there. And soon as I saw him and then I heard the presentation, I said, oh, he has to appear on the Reading Circle. And he graciously accepted. So, Rich, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
I am thrilled, and as they can say in, I guess, Black church vernacular, thrilled and happy glad that you rose this morning to join me on this interview. Because as we were talking prior to coming on the air, the topic is so urgent, relevant, and real that it needs to be discussed, and then beyond discussion, action needs to be taken. So for those of you in the listening audience, particularly if you're educators, if you're in the classroom, and if you're in an urban, or even if you're not in the urban setting, what we're going to talk about this morning is discussion that is needed, and again, as I said, and then to be acted upon. So we are going to share some information with the listening audience. Listening audience, you know what to do. It is your chance to listen to the information that I share with you, as well as get on all your social media sites and let someone know that H. Richard Milner is on the air with me, and we're going to be talking about race.
Hey, what's up? Thinking about you. XOXOXO. Want to snuggle. ... JK. Hit me back. You getting these texts? ? We should hang later. I miss you. Holla at ya, boy. Holla back. Holla back. Holla back. Are you at home? Where are you? What are you doing? OMG. You are making me mad. Are you with your ex? You better text me back. I'm waiting outside your house.
Relentless texting is like sending an angry robot to deliver your message. When does the robot become dangerous? Let us know at that'snotcool.com.
That'snotcool.com.
Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back to the Reading Circle with your host, Marc Medley. My guest this morning is Dr. H. Richard Milner from the University of Pittsburgh School of Education. And Rich, I tell you, we're going to jump right in because in many cases, when I have an author, we'll go all the way up the line from when they began writing and when did the interest in writing begin. Was it in high school or in elementary school or what have you? But I'm going to go ahead and skip that portion since we know you're in education. So it would logically reason that you would be doing some writing. But I tell you what, let's jump right in terms of race, because your latest book is, I believe this is your latest one, correct?
Sure, yes.
Because I know you've done, as we said in the bio, 5, so this is the latest. And I want to go directly to that one, and then we can work the other works in, or however they relate. And so his latest book, which I encourage you to get a copy of, whether you're an educator or not, is, as I said earlier, Racing. That's RAC, open paren, E, close paren. It's a play on words, and I always love a play on words. Racing to Class, Confronting Poverty and Race in Schools and Classrooms. On the front, there's a blurb by Cornel West with a growing focus on poverty, race, and equality in America. Milner's timely and sophisticated book deserves widespread discussion and debate. That's what we want to do this morning. We won't have the debate, but we'll have the discussion. His subtle and sensitive analysis are just what we need, and that's quote unquote by Cornel West. So I tell you what, Rich, where did Racing to Class come from, and how did you put it together? What were your thoughts behind it? What's your message did you intend to get across? Because we were talking earlier about just how urgent this is. So I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to let you take the mic.
Well, once again, Mark, I want to just take this opportunity to thank you for the opportunity to be on your show and to talk about this important and what we both sort of classify as an urgent matter. And the book, again, is for educators, but it's also for anyone really interested in more deeply understanding issues of race and what role they might play in participating in both discourse and discussion, but also actions regarding meeting the needs of some of the most underserved students in the country and also the world. What I've come to understand, and the book is written, actually at my parents' house in Griffin, Georgia, as I speak to you, and I wanted to write the book in a way that spoke and that speaks to not only educators but folks who are interested in education, parents, community organizers, anyone interested in ensuring that educational experiences meet the needs of all students. It was the late Asa Hilliard who said that if we're not more mindful of meeting the needs of those who are most underserved, each of us will pay we will reap the consequences of our inaction. So the book really, Mark, it's been a long time coming. I spent a lot of time in classrooms observing. I've even taught some classes in the middle and high school classroom settings. And I spent a lot of time talking to educators about ways to sort of better meet the needs of students. But I've also spent a lot of time attempting to understand what's happening with our children in schools. We know that students succeed, for instance, when mechanisms and structures are in place to support them. But however, what we often do in education is we often sort of blame the victim, if you will. We expect students to meet unrealistic expectations without support sometimes to meet and sort of reach those goals. And so my goal in writing the book really has been to support educators in the arduous task of being supportive and meeting the needs of every child in the classroom.
It's interesting. I heard you coin that phrase, or say the phrase that has been coined, rather, in terms of blaming the victim. And some listening in this audience, and I'm quite sure some that sits in your presentations, will say, well, why do we even have to have this discussion about race? I mean, kids are kids, regardless of where they're coming through. Schools are schools. Why do we have to segment out, or why do we have to focus on whether they're African American, or whether they're Indian, or whether they're Caucasian, or whether they're Chinese, or whether they're whatever? Why do we even have to worry about that? And it was interesting, as I sat in your presentation, to just kind of scan the audience and look at some of the faces as you were presenting the material you were presenting, because I'm sure for some they're saying, okay, now look, African Americans or black people have been here all these years. We just don't understand. Why do we have to keep going through all these hoops? Why do we have to keep having all these discussions? Why do we have to do anything different for them? What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, let's be frank here. I mean, the reality is we're not living in a post-racial society. You know,
Correct.
Although, you know, when we with the election of President Obama, you know, many sort of adopted this discourse that we somehow overcome centuries of racism and decades of oppression and issues of discrimination and so forth. And the facts just really counter those arguments. And one of the points that I tried to make, and that I tried to convey with educators who happen to be 80%, more than 80% of teachers in schools across the country, across the United States, are white, middle class, and female. And increasingly, what we know is that students are becoming more racially diverse than ever. And so if we are not mindful and if we're not more persistent and consistent in addressing issues of race, we're going to find ourselves, falling farther behind, or we're going to find ourselves in a holding pattern. And the other point I want to make is the reality is that white is a race as well. You know, we act like when we talk about race, we automatically default to brown students, you know, or we automatically default to black students. We're talking about, the book really is about meeting the needs of every child. And I support African American children, Latino children, American Indian children, white children as well. We have got to be mindful that every child matters. And when we're talking about race, every individual in these United States is raced. And so, so that is what I really want people to understand. And to your point about why do we have to focus in on a particular group of students, it is always telling to me, Mark, I do professional development across the country, and it is always telling to me when I show up at a PD site and the principal or the superintendent or whoever has invited me to conduct the work meets me and says, our issues really are about poverty, or they're really about social class. We really don't have a race issue, right? And,
right.
And it just does not bear out when you look at the data. I mean, when you look at the data, we know that, for instance, the Office of Civil Rights in 2011 and 2012, they're compiling these data from 16,500 school districts across the country, and that represents about 97,000 schools, and which is about 49 million students. And we know that this work and these issues of race and issues of racism and over referrals of students in terms of suspension, they start in preschool.
Correct.
18%, Mark, 18% of African American students are enrolled in preschools across the country. So get this, 18%. And 42% of these preschoolers are suspended once, and 48% of these 18% of student service, 48% of student preschoolers are suspended more than once, right? In preschool. And so, but I always, sort of joke and say, what are these students doing? Are they throwing Cheerios? They're starting. Imagine what happens to a child
right.
who starts his or her educational experiences, and we can talk about African American males. We can parse their group out if you want and talk more specifically about them. But imagine what an educational experience is like for a black child who starts his or her educational experience in preschool with a suspension.
That is correct. And in terms of right there on that point, because you gave the statistic about, I believe I heard you say, if I'm not mistaken, 80% plus of the teaching population are Caucasian middle class females. And the discussion and the notion in many cases come up that there is the possibility, and I'm trying to be, and I don't like political correctness, but I'm being that right now. But there's a possibility, because I know it's beyond possibility. I know it is, for a disconnect between teacher and student. So to your question of what you were just saying is like, well, what could this preschooler be doing that would cause suspension? And many would say they're not doing anything but except what a preschooler would normally do at that age. But if there's a disconnect and the thinking is that they're doing something wrong or the only way to handle it is through some type of consequences that is now in the form of suspension. Because as a principal, I'm constantly getting hit with, Mr. Medley, you don't do nothing, our kids have no consequences. But really what they're saying is that you didn't do what I wanted you to do, which was suspend them to get them out of my class.
Right,
So,
absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So I want to be clear for your listeners that the fact is that teachers from any racial or ethnic background can be successful with any group of students. So there's solid evidence to suggest that white teachers can be successful with majority black students, that black teachers can be successful with majority white students. So I want to make that point. But they're not successful, Mark, because they are, they have a friend outside of their own racial and ethnic group. I have white teachers come up to me and say, I have black friends.
Right.
Or good for you, right? But they're successful,
right,
because they build the knowledge, the attitudes, the dispositions, the skill set, and the mindset to be successful with those students. And so the literature calls it ethnic matching. And you're absolutely right. If your life experiences are inconsistent with the students with whom you work from a race and a racialized perspective, from a social class perspective, then you have got to build the skills to be able to be responsive. It's not that teachers don't have, or educators in general don't have good intentions. I
Correct.
Actually, to the contrary, teachers tend to be doing, working hard, doing the best they can with the skills and the supports they have. But that is not enough. Good intentions, you can have great intentions, but you've got to go beyond that, and you've got to build a skill set to be responsive to the realities of what happens. I want to share with you a quick story. I was about a month and a half ago, I received a phone call from my dad, and my dad is, he's actually in the other room now, and he's a no nonsense kind of guy. He his words. He's a tough
right.
guy. And he called and he said, and he doesn't call often. We talk. When we talk, we tend to talk for 3 or 4 minutes. We talk often, and he says what he had to say, and he gets off the phone. But he called and he said, Rich, I just was thinking about you, and I want you. And I'm a 40-something-year-old man, black.
Right.
He said, when we said, I want you to, if the police pulls you over, I want you to, remember everything we talked about. I don't care what they tell you to do, you do it.
Right.
You don't backtalk. You don't pose any questions. And he said to me, because you're going to bury me, I'm not going to bury you.
Right.
And in that moment, Mark, I get chills as I tell that story, man, because in that moment, I was reminded that it doesn't matter, regardless of my pedigree.
Correct.
The fact that I have 3 letters behind my name. My dad was reminding me in that instance that I am a black man.
Absolutely.
Don't ever forget it, buddy. And so those race experiences outside of school, Mark, directly impacts not only Rich Milner, the professor, it impacts all of us in profound ways. And so my point here really is, if we as educators are not mindful of the ways in which race operates both outside and inside of the classroom, we miss powerful, provocative opportunities to be responsive to their humanity.
That's absolutely right. And I'm going to share some more information with the listening audience. If you just joined us, you've got to tell somebody. First off, if you just joined us, good morning. But now that you've joined us, you got to get on your mobile devices and any of your computers and any way that you communicate and tell someone to go to gobrave.org if they're anywhere outside of the New Jersey, New York area. They need to log on, make sure they turn on their speakers. There's a large orange box in there that says listen. Click on that because they need to hear what we're talking about this morning. And I'm going to share the information with you. But Rich, you said in terms of developing the skill set, because see, this is where folks get touchy in terms of when we start talking about race, everybody puts up the defense wall. And really, when we're having these discussions, we're not trying to blame and point fingers or try to put anybody on a guilt trip or any of that. We're trying to grapple with the situation and help folks come up with, as you just said, the strategies and the tools to be able to effectively communicate with each other. Because at the end of the day, it really does come down to being able to communicate based on everybody's backgrounds, filters, and experiences. So that's what you said. That's where we're trying to get people to go, is to develop the skills to be able to see why or where people may come from and why they come from. And then how do you now bridge those gaps and close things so that everybody kind of is talking on the same page? So when it's all said and done in education, we get the child to get whatever he or she needs to get. And depending on your background and your filters, it drives everything else in terms of how you see things. So I constantly share with my staff in terms of race and poverty. I said, you all have to understand, we're dealing with a normal, abnormal inverse. Things that may seem normal to you is abnormal to the community we serve, and things that seem normal to the community we serve may seem abnormal to us. Now, given that, how do we operate? And that's what we're kind of talking about this morning, particularly when we start talking from the racial context, because the backgrounds are different. And if you go into the situation thinking that you're going to get the outcome based on your experience, and then you don't get it, then you get frustrated, and then you start wanting consequences and judiciary and so forth and so on, and disciplinary actions for things that may not require it. So I'm going to share this information. We're going to continue with that discussion. My guest is H. Rich Milner.
Find stuff under there? What about jobs? No? Now try your basement. There's a pair of overalls that overall you're not so into anymore. A perfectly good laptop that hasn't seen your lap in months. And even more stuff. But still no jobs? Well, you really have both. See, stuff is defined as household articles considered as a group. Sometimes this stuff is no longer needed. Wait, no longer needed? That can't be right. Because remember those jobs you were looking for? Those are really needed. And they're the stuff inside your stuff. Even inside that winter coat that moved with you to Phoenix. Our job is to unlock those jobs. And it starts when you donate your stuff to your local Goodwill. Here's how we do it. When you donate to Goodwill, we sell your stuff to provide job training for people right here in your community. So just by teaming up with Goodwill, you help create jobs. And isn't that worth parting with the leftover keytar from your 80s cover band? Goodwill. Donate stuff, create jobs. Find your nearest donation center at goodwill.org. A message from Goodwill and the Ad Council.
Hi, my name is Stan Myers, and I'm here at FM 88.7. I do a jazz show called Just a Mood. And if you like the music, anything from Louis to Lester Boyd, I'm your man. That's Sunday afternoons, 3 to 6. Looking to hear from you, okay?
All right, we've shared our information with you. And I'm sure you've done your due diligence in terms of sharing. Let's see how much influence you have in terms of getting someone to log on to gobrave.org to hear this very urgent and timely discussion. Rich, right before I shared the information with folks, we were talking about this whole notion of the building of the skills. And you can put the answer in context of that, as well as one of the things you said in the presentation that I was in that you asked folks, were they uncomfortable when we started talking about race? Tie all the fact that people generally are uncomfortable, particularly in mixed body. Now, they may not be uncomfortable whenever they're in closed doors, but when they get into mixed body, everybody gets uncomfortable about talking about race. But how do we move beyond it to build those skills that you're talking about?
I just want to just stress and reiterate the point, Mark, that as adults is educators, folks who are adults, struggle with being responsive to and engaging in not only conversation about race and issues of race. We're going to find ourselves reaping the consequences. Because we as adults are uncomfortable with it, and because there's power that's associated both from a race perspective, but also in numbers. White folks can say, I don't want to engage in it, or I choose to spend my time, effort, and energy engaging in something that is more fruitful. I had a teacher come up to me, actually make a comment in a session I did a few weeks ago, and who said, I choose to buy into the fact that we're all from the human race, and many of her white colleagues sort of applauded, and that's fine. If you want to adopt that sort of notion that you're not going to engage in the tough conversations about race, that it serves as a precursor to the kinds of practices, then what you'll find yourself doing is engaging in the same practices, and it really leads to insanity.
Right.
If you okay, then don't engage race, and continue underserving the students with whom most deserve, most need the kinds of responses. Teachers adopt, people in general, and I'm talking here across racial and ethnic lines. They engage in these sort of colorblind conversations, especially in what I want to call mixed company. And the reality is, when you look at the data, shame on us. Shame on us. When we look at the data and we see who is referred to the office for disciplinary infractions, you see black and brown children overwhelmingly when you talk from a proportion perspective. When you look at achievement scores and patterns, and you look at the groups of students who are most grossly underserved, you're talking about black and brown children and children, white children who live below the poverty line. So we can decide that we're not going to engage and critically examine, ourselves. As you were reading the quote from Faison, and we can talk about and not engage in the difficult sort of self-reflective activities that we know have the potential to best sort of push us forward in terms of building the skills, or we can say that we're tired, that we want to systemically shift the ways in which we do the work in order to be, more engaging and more responsive to students and their needs. I want to make sure this point is clear, and it goes back to the pivotal work of Mamie and Kenneth Clark. And when you think about the doll tests that were conducted with children, with very young children, and there was the doll tests were used as sort of the NAACP's seminal study, a germinal study to desegregate schools across the country in Brown v. Board. And what we know is that children develop a white bias at a very, very early age.
Correct.
They develop a white bias at a very, very early age, right? And when you talk to parents, and these are studies that have actually been replicated, time and time again since Kenneth and Mamie Clark conducted studies in the 1940s and the 1950s. Even more currently, when you talk to parents, black parents, brown parents, white parents, some of these parents will say, well, I haven't had conversations with my children about race, right? I haven't engaged these conversations with my children about race. And parents and teachers in particular will say, I don't deal with that race stuff, in my classroom. Yet, what the studies show is that children at a very young age are developing these racialized and these race messages.
That's correct.
So what that tells us is very clearly, even when we choose not to engage the difficult conversations, students are developing and they're engaging these race experiences and these race ways of thinking, even though we're not, just by living and breathing.
Absolutely.
Just by being in these United States, students are engaged in these racialized experiences. So I don't want to go too deeply here, but I just want to say that what the research shows is this, and that is that students' racial and ethnic identities, right, that is the way I feel about myself, right, having a strong racial and ethnic identity directly impacts their academic achievement.
There's no question. And for those in the listening audience, I know particularly if you're an educator, you're probably familiar with what Dr. Milner was talking about in terms of that test. But to quickly give you the test, a white doll and a black doll was placed in front of black children, and they were asked to choose, which doll do you want? Which one would you take? And overwhelmingly, a black child would pick the white doll. And interestingly enough, Rich, as you were making the presentation and you made that point, I was sitting next to one of my white colleagues. And he turned to me and said, is that test still valid in 2015? Because they did that test back in the 40s, 50s. And he's a doctor as well. I said, and his name was Rich as well. And I said, you know what? I said, that test, if you did it today, would still, if they do it today, and when they do it today, the child still picks that doll. And the reason is because, just like you said, in terms of how we're socialized, constantly in the media, what you see is there's supposed to be beauty on magazine covers and everything else is
white is right.
Right. Is that representation is there. That's all you see. When you start looking at our curriculums and you start talking history, it's very few history books that include the African American or other culture experience in terms of their contributions and inventions and all those things. Those things get left out. Now they're there, but you don't hear a whole lot about Garrett Morgan inventing the traffic light and the fire extinguisher and the this, that, and the other, and you don't hear a whole lot beyond the tried and true George Washington carvers and all that. You don't hear too much about that. So, of course, we don't have to say it, but it's an unwritten rule, it's an unwritten law. So that's what you begin to socialize, and you begin to think, well, anything that mattered didn't look like me.
That's right. And I think as we talk about how to transform the curriculum, that is, teachers have to teach what they're expected to teach. But here's where the power comes in, Mark. The power is in the pedagogy. The power is in the instruction, right?
Correct.
So the ways in which teachers are able to bring that curriculum to life is so important. It's so important. When I think back to, if you're talking about inventions, let's say, in a history classroom, being able to sort of transcend and move beyond the sort of Eurocentric inventors to include other aspects of sectors of ethnic and racial contributions, that's something that teachers can bring into the classroom to enhance what it is they're supposed to be teaching. And the other point that I want to make sure that we make clear here is that the curriculum is not only this thing that's this static set of information that is written down, let's say, in a document, in a curriculum guide or on the website, right? The curriculum is also about who we are as individuals.
Correct.
I'm a curriculum. Mark, you're a curriculum. Our children, each of those students who comes into that classroom is a curriculum text, himself or herself.
That's correct.
So when you think about, here's where race comes in, for instance. When you think about Ferguson, right, or you think about these unarmed black bodies being shot down and killed like savages, right? When you think about those experiences that students actually witness and observe across the country, it doesn't have to happen in Patterson. Right? Students see themselves directly tied and linked to those folks.
That's correct.
Who are being those black bodies. We embody.
Right.
Those. And so when teachers and when administrators stay away from those conversations, what students hear is my curriculum, the things that matter to me outside of this space, right, don't matter.
Right.
That's the message that students are getting.
And
So
that's exactly and right. And that doesn't have to be said. You can intuit that. You can infer that. You can, however way you want it, you can take that in without a word being said. Now, as we were just saying, let's say, for example, because Rich, I always say this, I can't think in any time in history of a better time of being a student or a teacher for that matter in terms of access to information. Because I know as I came through school, the internet did not exist, not publicly. There was no such thing as just being able to go to Google or any other search engine. You went to the encyclopedia or the library, the card catalog, and I remember typing papers with stencil paper and all that kind of good stuff. But I just sat here as we were talking because I said, well, while we're talking, because I have computers and everything all around me, let me just try something. Because even if I'm a white teacher and I know I'm teaching inventions per se, and I know I'm sitting in front of a classroom of predominantly African-American, Hispanic children or whatever, how could I infuse something that might connect with them into the lesson? Because like you just said, I know what the curriculum says. I know what my lesson plan says. I know what the text may say that the district has provided. But how can I make this real for my students? So just now as we were talking, I just went to Google and keyworded inventions by black people. That was the keywords I put in. And I'm just going to read some of them that came back. 20 black inventions over the last 100 years you may not know about. Top 10 inventions by African Americans, how stuff works. 7 things that wouldn't exist without black people. Inventors and inventions, African American inventors, inventions by African Americans. My point is, there's nothing stopping a teacher from doing what I just did. Clicking on those links and then being able to insert that into their lesson. So even if it's not in the district provided textbook, there's nothing stopping a teacher from supplementing to make it inclusive and to make the lesson whole and something that the children would react to and relate to, because education really is about relating and connecting.
Absolutely, Mark. I and just to pick up on your point, this idea of relationship is critical, and students know when teachers what Start Where You Are does. The book I wrote, Start Where You Are, but Don't Stay There. That book really captures, if you will, the power of relationship building.
Right.
And so it demonstrates that teachers who have the ability to cultivate relationships with their students, with family, with community, tend to do better than those teachers who come in and try to teach a curriculum that's disconnected from the lived realities
Correct.
of what students are experiencing. And so building those relationships, what the research suggests is clear, that some students won't learn from teachers whom they don't have a solid or a sustainable relationship.
Correct.
With.
So
they don't care.
Right.
I don't care how smart you are.
Right.
I don't care how much math you know. Right. If they don't see you
this is
as
correct.
a who gives a darn about them and the realities of what they're dealing with. Just think about it for a moment. It's all about our lenses, Mark. It's all about.
Correct.
So for instance, a child who I was in a school, I was doing some observations, and this student was talking to me. She works about 5 or 6 hours a night. So she gets out of school at 3:30. She leaves school about 3:30. She goes and she works at a fast food restaurant to support her family about 4 nights during the week and at least one day over the weekend. Sometimes she works both Saturday and Sunday. And here's a student who is maintaining about a C grade point average. Right. This is a Latina, a brown sister who was, supporting her family. Mother, father, they're working, low-waged jobs. And the conversations I had, and this is not to beat up on teachers, but the conversation I had with the teacher was, the student has so much potential, but I tell you, she just doesn't put forth as much effort because most of the time she comes in, she's tired because she's been working until 9:30, 10:30 at night. Rather than saying, "Wow,
right.
this is an asset.
Right.
This child is able to negotiate and essentially work. I mean, because if you think about school as a workspace, which is what many of the students experience, right?
Correct.
This child is starting her day at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning and going all day, right? And we see that, and yet we don't see that as we don't build from that as an asset. We don't see that as an asset. We only operate from the deficits when it comes to our children, and it's shame on us. Shame on us for not.
I agree.
Identifying the brilliance that not only this student, but just in general, the ways in which our children are able to navigate difficult situations. Students are walking through challenging neighborhoods, stepping over crack pipes and walking through gang activity, and they get to you in the classroom, man. They walk in, the first thing we say is sit down and shut up. Come on.
Yes.
Come on, man. We have got to do better. We can do better. We must.
No, we have to. And it was so interesting because, again, as I sat through your session, you gave the example of, I believe, the robbery or the killing or something that had occurred right outside of the school, and the teachers wouldn't talk about it. They didn't want to. And I sat there and I said, wow. And I'm sitting next to somebody. I said, he must have been to my school, because in September we had a murder that happened right down on where my school is located. Is 2 schools right next to each other, and I've been principal of both. And right directly across the street, it was right there on the corner from the school I had just left a couple of years ago, and my school is right behind it. One of our teenagers was murdered. It was like around 11:30 that night, or 11:30, or whatever it was. I think she was coming from basketball practice, and it was a drive-by. And it turned out to be some local guys from, around Patterson. And our staff members were kind of doing the same thing as you described. And I went in and said, no. You have got to, first off, like you said, the children were grieving, because I had my building full of kids that knew this kid. And so, like, the district sent out grief counselors. We had about 7 or 8 guidance counselors that came over. Kids were still grieving. But then we had the opportunity. I tried to teach you got to use this as a teachable moment, in terms of, because some of the students that were involved in that were students that we had at some point as teachers or administrators. So, but again, just to have when I went in the classroom and we started putting things up on the whiteboard, on the smart board, and we started putting some pictures, kids started talking. You know what? That's my cousin. I know that one, and I know, and the kids started talking. But if you're not willing, I sit here and I get excited about conversations like this, because it's like the question that comes to my mind is, how come that insight and foresight is not there with the majority? There are some that get it, but the majority either don't or refuse to go there, but they don't realize the benefits on the back end of what would come from it.
Yeah, I think that what I find often is the challenges that teachers have are more systemic than anything, right? So in Pittsburgh, for instance, I've been told that when we experience situations similar to what you described, the leadership will say, you may not engage these conversations, or the district office will send down a mandate to say, that you should not find ways to incorporate aspects of crime or the robbery or shooting or whatever in the curriculum. And so teachers may find themselves actually wanting to engage in these conversations to support students in their own through these traumatic situations, but not be allowed to. And moreover, what often happens is, we talk about skill, right? We've got to help, and you sound like the kind of principal, Mark, who will help teachers scaffold and help teachers build the skill set to be able to engage these. But if the teachers don't have the skills to be able to invite conversation in productive ways, then that's something that systemically we've got to do a better job of helping teachers develop. The other point that I think is important is really about when you say that the district sent over 7 or 8 additional sort of guidance counselors or social workers or psychologists or whomever to support students. I think that's admirable. But what I would sort of advance is this notion that our children are grieving every day, Our children are going
Correct.
through counseling and are going through psychological challenges every single day.
Every minute.
And so,
correct.
And so, rather than increasing the number of counselors on days when we experience trauma or we experience, the loss of life, we need to. This is, what we know pretty clearly from good science is that we should be intensifying these levels of support.
Correct.
Every day.
Correct.
For our children. Every day for our children. The dean of social work at the University of Pittsburgh, he and I talk, and one of the things Larry Davis always says is academic problems are social problems.
That's correct. I
agree.
agree.
So from a social work perspective, man, we can't only focus on the academics. And what I try to do in Race into Class is I try to demonstrate and to make clear not only the information, right? Because, the information, I can lay out all the data, right? But how do you build a skill set? How do you build the knowledge and the attitudes, right, that allow you to sort of understand the social, to understand how to be responsive to the social. And I'm gonna sort of complement that idea to say to understand the psychology of what's happening with our children. And until we take a more holistic sort of approach to supporting students, then it's going to be difficult for us to move on the academics.
Well, it really is, and that is the argument. And I want you to continue your thought. But while you were there, I make that argument constantly, and constantly the pushback I get, because the school that I'm in now was transferred to 2 years ago. I'm going into my third year there, and because of the community that we serve, because they are so challenging, that's the approach I've taken for the last 2 years. And the academic scores have not moved, and I get a lot of, well, Mark, that's not, when we start talking the social stuff, I get a lot of, well, that's nice, but the scores. Oh, well, that's nice, you're trying to get your culture and climate together, but the scores. But it's almost like all the stuff that we're trying to do holistically or from the standpoint of the social is almost like poo-pooed. It's like, well, yeah, that's nice, but we're the business is academics. And my constant pushback is exactly what you just said. I can't get to the academics. And I told the superintendent that we have a lot of other gaps that we're trying to close other than the achievement gap. We're trying to close the poverty gap, the race gap, the economic gap. And he said, that's a good point. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Listen, come on. Let's be clear here. Students are more than mere test scores.
Yes.
I mean, we shame on us. Shame on us. And the fact that we spend so much of our time, effort. You think about a student who is being abused every day. Okay, think about a child who's being bullied, or think about a child who's contemplating suicide. Who gives a crap? Excuse my French. About whether or not a score moves when what you're doing in the school supports the child to the degree that you've talked the child off a ledge. You've talked the child into showing up for school and not being pushed out by the educational system. And unfortunately, what we in education have come to adopt and believe is that there's some quick fixes in education.
Yes,
it's not.
Exactly.
Listen, let me tell you, this work. I don't care how brilliant you are, how outstanding you are. You have got in order for the scores to move, and I'd argue that the kinds of things that you have in place now, if persistent, if pervasive, if consistent, you will start to see
correct
in the game. But what we find is it takes time
and exactly. And because every research and every one of you all that I've talked to that I've now come as mentors and network, your doctors and your past superintendents and every last one of you I've talked to, from Mike Miles to Mike Chiricello to you to other folks, it says it takes at minimum 3 to 5 and most time 5 to 7. And yet leadership teams and sometimes teachers, but more so leadership teams, constantly keep getting moved around within a 2 to 3 year window. And back to that quick fix. Same thing with programs. This program's in, this program's out. This program's in, this program's out. Same thing, looking for that quick fix. Instead of focusing on the things that we're talking about right now for that 3 to 5, 5 to 7 year period, then you'll begin, and that's not to say that it's going to take you 7 years for scores to move. That's not what we're trying to say. But we're saying if you're addressing some of these social issues, they will eventually begin to move because the social and the academic are connected. Hence what we're talking about in terms of race and poverty.
Right, and I also would just like to add that I think achievement scores on tests, they tell us something, right? But you've got to also make sure you're keeping record of a range of different outcomes. Right. So, do students show up more? Right? Are they more attentive when they show up? Are office referrals decreasing? Right? When students are referred to the office, are you finding that suspensions are decreasing? We know that when students are not in the classroom, Mark, we know that they are not experiencing valuable instructional time that lead to to achievement gains, right? So, and we also know that that behavior can be socially constructed.
Correct.
Right. So, in other words, if you were to come to my home for, let's say, for Thanksgiving, you might think we were nuts. My family, we do Thanksgiving in a different way.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that we don't care about each other, that we don't love each other. Right? We have a different way. And what we've done in education, to get back to the race point, what we often do is we have one sort of normative way of thinking about how one is supposed to behave, right? And whiteness is seen as the norm. Anything, what researchers have shown time and time again, and these, by the way, just for your listeners in terms of substantiation, what the researchers conducting some of the most sort of provocative research in this area now happen to be white men. So Ralph Skiba and Dan Lowson at UCLA, they're conducting research, and they've looked at hundreds of disciplinary referrals, right? They're in the thousands now. And what the research teams are showing across the country, Mark, is that when you look at these referrals, what you find is that black children, African American children, Latino children, those children are referred to the office for what's known as subjective.
Absolutely.
That is, you're rude or
chewing gum.
Right.
Right. Yes.
And white children are referred to the office for more objective infractions.
That's correct.
I.e., you're late, or I'm observing you fighting with, I broke up a fight. That's more objective, right? And then we have a nerve to compare the achievement gains or the achievement scores between those students. Well, we're sending black and brown students to the office outside of the classroom at alarmingly high rates. And so, what do you expect?
That's correct.
What do you, so again, I want to make a point that these problems are systemic. A lot of times they are ingrained. They're ingrained in our biases, in our perception. They're sometimes hidden from us. And if we are not more conscious of them, if we don't try to bring these issues to the forefront, we're going to find ourselves in a holding pattern. We're going to find ourselves not making the kinds of progress that we know are necessary. So why, back to your point about why race, that's why.
That's why.
Because we're operating from a racist. Yeah, we're operating from a racist.
You can say that's why.
That perpetually disserves certain groups of students.
And that's why it's right, because the statistic that you gave, Ron, this is where folks have to connect the dots. And again, it is not about bashing. It is not about guilt. It's not about none of that. But it is how to better communicate. And that is, you just said within the hour that 80% of the teaching force are Caucasian women. All right. If that's the view, if your norm is how you're filtering, and now whenever you come up against a different norm, and then you take that as, well, that's back to that inverse I was talking about earlier, the norm, abnorm, norm. If you now see that action as something that's wrong based on your experience, that's why you keep sending to the office. Now, like I said, I'm the type of administrator because this is kind of like my ilk. For me, and I know the numbers in terms of suspensions, in many instances, most of my students will come down and they'll have to talk to me. And in many instances, I'll ask them, you want the sermon or the suspension? And they'll say, we'll take the sermon. Sometimes it's you know what? We don't want to hear this again. But which one? But a lot of times I will talk and we'll go over, what you did, how could you have done that better, yada, 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 don't do it again, and so forth and so on. If you walk into my office, it looks like a museum. So everything in there is something I can use as a story. And so the kids will get that. And then they go back to class. That's when I get hit from the teachers with, Mr. Medley, don't do nothing. You had no consequences. I said, trust me, that child sitting in my office, that was a consequence. The fact that they had to talk to me for the X amount of minutes, that was a consequence. But back to your point, the kid needs to be in class. They are not going to learn, not to mention in the community that I serve, suspension really doesn't mean anything to them. Again, this is what I constantly have to share with staff is, as a child, to you and to me, being sent to the principal's office or being suspended, I mean, that was as close to because I know what my parents would have done in my entire academic career. I never had to go to the principal's office or get suspended because I know what my parents would have done. That's not what we're dealing with. I'm dealing with kids that will say, go.
Right. No, you're giving them it's not punishment.
Right.
You're giving them exactly right. So they get to leave school. Whoop-de-whoop. Right. That's what, and my question is this: why do schools have to be places and classrooms have to be spaces where students don't want to be?
Right.
Why can't we develop an educational structure and system where we cultivate learning, where we Mark, to be clear, our children are brilliant. Our children
they are
brilliant. They are able to navigate and negotiate a world. You're talking about social media. You're talking about being able to engage with issues of technology in ways that I have young children. They come and they're able to navigate technology in ways that I just can't even. I'm still trying to get my head around. And so, but again, it's the lenses by which we look. And I want to be clear about how we think about teachers here as well. I tend to, as a former high school English teacher, I understand that teachers are grappling with a range of stress and accountability measures, and they're really working hard to meet the needs of our children. I really do believe that. And what we've got to do a better job of is we've got to do a much, much better job of supporting those teachers. We've got to do a much, much better job of supporting the communities in which our students are living and learning. You talk about your parents and the consequences of being suspended. The same thing was true for me.
Right.
Growing up, the same thing is true for many of our children, our black and brown children across the country, even today. But people tend to react to the realities, and they tend to behave and respond to the realities of their lived conditions. And so what schools have to do is, and I want to move into some recommendations in terms of, we've sort of talked about the issues. Like the one big issue that I want to make sure that I've conveyed here is that the reason I'm talking about race in class is that when you look proportionally at the percentage of students who live below the poverty line, you have a larger percentage of black and brown children. So you can't talk about poverty.
Right.
You can't talk about socioeconomic status without talking about and being mindful of race, right? But, we've got to provide mechanisms and support networks to support families who are struggling financially.
That is correct.
The school has to become a centerpeace, you will, for helping families who are struggling financially, right?
That's correct.
So it's always telling, when I give talks to teachers and I do a lot of professional development, and I've been, I'm honored that I get called and we tend to, schools tend to make improvements when it's sustained and it's ongoing, and but what I know is that when families are struggling financially, it's hard for them. It's hard for them to be to support their children in ways that we might need support for them in education, right? So, when you think about the economy and supporting families and making sure families have what they need to support their children, we've got to make sure financial support. We've got to make sure job placement. We've got to rethink how we do this school thing. Right?
There's no question.
And having the school as a centerpiece, or as a center stone, if you will, for providing that kind of feedback, I think is important. Brian Barnes, who's he just finished his doctorate at Harvard University, and Brian talks about it like this. Brian says that what we should be doing is the community should be seen as the center.
Yes.
Right? He says that the community should be seen as the center, whereas we tend to, in education, we put education in the center, and then we put all these different sort of entities and institutions around it, like the church, and we put, the community organizations, and we put the family outside of the circle. And he says that the community should be the center.
Correct.
And that the school should be one mechanism or one institution to support the community.
Right.
Right? And so if we're not doing work that empowers students to go and make a difference in their community, then who cares about the test score?
Right.
If we're not doing work to empower students to want to make a difference and to end homelessness, or to impact and to be of service in the work that and in their lives, who cares about a test score?
That is so true. Oh my God, that is so true.
Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, because I was saying I need to do some things because we crossed over into the 7 o'clock hour. But I want to continue on in that vein, and I want to after I finish sharing everything, I want to go back to this whole notion you were talking about in terms of teachers have it tough, and they do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We'll discuss that and then continue on this same thing, because I know you want to get into some recommendations as well, which is great, because most of the book, if the issues that we talked about in that 6 o'clock hour is what the book is about. Now, you need to read the book, but we tap danced and we got on the surface and we gave you a brief overview, but you need to get in depth. And the only way you can get in depth is to actually get a copy of the book, Racing to Class, RAC. And I always do the play on words because I want you to be clear. This is not RACING. It's RAC, open paren, E, close paren, ING. The E is in there. And I need you to make sure you understand, because you need to understand the emphasis is on race, of which we were talking about, because you cannot talk, as Rich just said, about poverty without talking about race, because of where the races fall within the poverty lines. So I'm going to share the information with you, whether I have to do all of that, legal IDs and top of the hour stuff. And then we're going to come back to our discussion. You got to let somebody know. I just texted my wife and said, this is one that, because Rich, I record these. So later on tonight or sometime, we're going to re-listen to this, because my wife is in education. My sister-in-law is up from Jamaica. She teaches there, as I said. And so I know they are going to be thrilled and tuned in and riveted tonight whenever we listen to the recording. So I need you all who are listening live, and the only reason they're not listening live because they're actually getting prepared to go on a church trip to Great Adventure. They're going down to great adventure today over at Six Flags. So they're getting on the bus, but otherwise they'd be hearing it live, but they're going to hear it later on tonight as well. But I'm encouraging those of you who are listening live, let somebody else know, because this is important. This is not just fluff we're talking here. This is not just poo-poo, that's nice. No. This will make the difference in your classrooms and in your schools.
WPSC-FM 88.7, Wayne, New Jersey.
Part of the William Patterson Broadcast Network. Brave New Radio.
Brave New Radio. Give us your tired, your poor, your hungry, your rockers, your punks, your freaks, your geeks, your Greeks, your party animals, your gangsters, your commuters, your residents, your students, your alums, your lawyers, your truckers, your calls, your tweets. And we'll give you rock, classic, indie, punk, alternative, easy, hard, raps, rhymes, mixes, and drops. We'll give you kick-ass music because we're WPSC 88.7 FM, Brave New Radio. Sound good?
Straight from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center, here's your local forecast.
All right, we've gone up a notch. It's 63 degrees. I'm going to give you the quick version of the weather so we can get back to this hot discussion. No pun intended. 88 as a high, 65 as a low today. Tomorrow expected to be partly cloudy. 89 as a high, 67 as a low on Monday. We're going to have mixed clouds and sun, 88 as a high, 66 as a low, scattered thunderstorms throughout the night. And then on Tuesday, 93 as a high, 69 as a low, mostly sunny skies, clearing up on Tuesday night as well, actually remaining clear. And then on Wednesday, 96 as a high, 70 degrees as a low, sunshine and some clouds, and a few clouds Wednesday night. All right, I gave you the Cliff Note version of the weather, and that was brought to you right here by the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. My guest this morning is Dr. H. Richard Milner from the University of Pittsburgh School of Education. We're talking about his work. His latest book is Racing to Class, Confronting Poverty and Race in Schools and Classrooms. And the question always comes up, and we've been talking about it, is, well, why do we have to talk about this or go through this again? Because it's all connected. And I'll use an example that's not race-related in terms of what we were talking about in terms of it being tough for teachers, because it is. With all the compliance, with all the regulation, with all the monitoring, with all the oversight groups, with all of the test score pressure, new evaluation systems, and on and on and on. It is tough in terms of being a teacher today. At the same time, I said earlier, it's not a better time to be one in terms of access of information, but it's not a worse time to be one in terms of always being under the microscope. But even with that, because Rich, this is what I tell my teachers. I understand the compliance stuff. And part of the reason why I think sometimes they don't do some of the things we talked about in the last hour in terms of going to Google and say, put in Black inventors, is because they're under such pressure with the test scores. So I tell them, look, I want you to be creative. I think a lot of folks have lost their desire or their creativity because of the compliance. So I tell my folks all the time, or our folks, look, you get creative, do your thing. I'll back you. If we're doing observations, or if somebody from central office come in, or somebody from the state of New Jersey comes in, or whoever, I'll back you if they question me as to why you might be doing something that may seem a little off. So I had one teacher, we walked in her classroom, or I walked in her classroom, and she was teaching, because this one's not race related, she was teaching fractions. But she took it upon herself to go to the supermarket and buy some tortilla shells, the little soft ones, not the hard ones, the soft ones that you make tortillas out of. And she had those kids with little plastic knives. They were cutting the tortilla shells, and they were cutting them up into fours or fifths or thirds or what have you. And the kids were having a blast. She, as the teacher, was having a blast. And I do declare that they are not going to forget fractions. And even if they do forget the concept of the fraction, if they think back to the tortilla shell, it's going to bring them back to what they were learning. And my challenge to the teachers is always do something that the kids will connect whatever the learning is with. So that's why I'm saying they will not forget fractions, because they're going to always think in Miss McMillan's class, I remember cutting up these tortillas. And not only that, Rich, they were able to explain what they were doing. She had them evaluate their cuts, and they went around and evaluated each other's cuts. Because you're at University of Pittsburgh, so you know this whole thing about accountable talk and so forth. Those kids were defending, and they were saying, one kid said, well, I tried to cut fourths, but I was off a little bit, and mine came into fifths. And but they didn't, and the same thing will occur and going back to relationships and connections. Now, talking about the poverty thing and filters, I had every now and again when my money gets funny and the bank account gets low, I get the experience what the community I serve feels. And that happened to me this past pay period. Whenever, Rich, I received my pay period for the 15th or whatever, this last one, the check was in a deficit before it even hit the bank. My checking account
that was real.
Oh my God, I am going to have to go until the next pay period, literally paycheck to paycheck. Going to have to go without any money from and it gave me a real good experience, a real good feeling for what the community I serve, this is what they live on a daily. Now that may happen to me every now and again, but this is how they live on a daily basis. And if you can't connect with that to get a feel for it, that's why you won't have the appreciation for the things you were talking about in terms of stepping over the drug dealers or the crackhead. I have a bunch of kids in my building who are homeless. Now, they're not going to tell you that because, they're ashamed or whatever. But if you don't recognize and realize that, you're not going to be able to, for lack of a better word, combat it. In other words, what strategy do I use for a kid that may be homeless? Kind of like the story you gave for the kid that was working.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you covered so many important points that I want to respond to. I want to start with this idea that teachers truly are under an enormous amount of pressure. Now, to be clear, prior to as a teacher, I would always say I want parents on my side. I need parents to support me. Right. And when I have my own children, I've shifted that. Now I'm on RIGHT side, right? I'm on right side. Right? So I want to be clear that my point here is not to beat up on teachers, not at all, because I do believe, just as a teacher, you mentioned who went above and beyond the call of duty to really to go out and get the the taco shells to support her lesson. I want to make it clear that there are many, many, many teachers out there who are engaged in this type of work, who are committed in this way. But the one point that I think we've got to think about from a systemic perspective is that the wellness of teachers. So not only are we thinking about should we be more deliberate about supporting students from a psychological and a counseling perspective. Teachers struggle. They're grappling with situations outside of the workplace.
Right.
Like students are. They're grappling with death and being abused and being mistreated and dealing with their own financial woes. We're in education, so we're we're not rich by any means.
Right.
So we find ourselves. What we find is teachers are grappling with challenging situations themselves, and so developing systemic wellness programs. What we know from the research is that teachers give you more. Adults give you more when they're well, right? When they feel whole and they feel supported, and those kinds of things. So systemically, we've got to do a better job of supporting teachers from a wellness perspective, from a psychological perspective, but also from a physical perspective as well. Teachers, I used to teach high school English, so I know what it's like to go home and have to reread hundreds of pages at night and read essays and things that take on and that require great amount of time outside of the regular workplace. So we've got to be mindful that we need to support teachers in that way. And in terms of supporting teachers in terms of skill development, I think it's important that we focus in on, there's a chapter in Racing to Class that I focus on instruction. And I just get down to the I don't want to say basics because there's nothing basic about good instruction. I get down to what it means to do outstanding instruction and to make the curriculum and the instructional practices relevant and responsive. And that when you were talking about the fractions example, what the teacher was doing is she was making the curriculum real.
Yes.
R-E-A-L, real. She was making the curriculum real. And that's what we've got to do, not only when we're talking about fractions, that's what we've got to do in every classroom, every single day. That's the kind of instruction that is needed and that is required for outstanding outcomes, conceptually and also in terms of what the kinds of outputs that you might get from your students. I want to also build on the point that our students are, from a race perspective, are dealing with what might be known as racial microaggressions. And so students, not only are students homeless, and I talk explicitly about homelessness among students and what that might mean and who's homeless and so forth in the book, but students are also grappling with other issues that are raised that educators, and I'm not only talking about white educators, but educators in general, may not necessarily understand, right? And so when a student comes into the classroom frustrated and refusing to engage in the work or and it's disruptive, there's a reason underlying those. And so what it's the teacher's responsibility to try to understand and try to get her or his head around to understand why students are behaving in the ways they are, so they can be responsive. I've been in conversations with middle school teachers, and they'll say things, especially when you're talking about black boys, black males, right? They treat these black students like they're adults.
Right.
You're talking about 12, 13, 14-year-old children, right? I don't care how tall Jamal is. Jamal is still a child. Developmentally, he's a child.
Correct.
So we've got to be developmentally responsive and developmentally appropriate when we respond to that 14-year-old who looks like he's 18. He is still 14 years old. Does that make sense?
It makes a whole lot of sense.
So what we do is we embody, we look at children like there are many adults and they are not. So when we look at their physical bodies, there's something psychologically. There are all these implicit biases tests that are out there. When we look at black bodies, right? When we look at darker skinned bodies, right? What does that trigger in us, right? Based on what the messages we get from society. What does that trigger in us to say that when Jamal's behavior is manifest in a particular way, I'm going to send him out, right? I'm going to send him down to Mr. Medley's office, right? In comparison to when John acts out, to say I'm going to give John another chance. Right? Why are these things happening, right? And how can we be more responsible? Like when I send my children to school every day, my wife is actually traveling at the moment. And when I send my children to school each day, and I'm trying to do hair, and I'm giving you the best I can give. I'm giving you my best as a parent. I'm presenting to you as the teacher my best, and I want you to treat my children, like you treat your own children. I want you to care for them. And I want you to have the kind of love and commitment to them that you have for your own biological children. And that is what we need. That is the step that's necessary to really be responsive to the humanity of who children are.
That's correct. There, in many instances, I've asked staff members, would you accept from your child bringing home the assignment you're giving this child right here? And a lot of times that question stuns them. No. The assignment that you're giving this child, or would you accept the reason that if your child was sent to the main office, would you accept that reason that your child was being accepted to the main office? And a lot of times that's a reflective question. It forces them to think. It really does. But that is, and going back to what you said, if these things that we were talking about, because I love connecting the dots, I really do. Back to the suspension rate and sending to the office and being out of the classroom. If your class is engaging, your kids will want to be there. And I have seen this. Matter of fact, the teachers that I get the least disciplinary concerns out of are the most active and engaged teachers. The kids can't wait to get to their class. And then you have those that truly believe the lecture mode is the way. Now, class, turn to page 87. And they sit there and they talk. And so now the kid that has checked out or who does not resonate with that type of teaching, they're bored. You know what? Hey, I'm going to hit little Johnny next door to me. And now you got an issue with fighting or hitting or throwing paper across the room or whatever. But I do not have that with teachers who really sit down and take the time, like, okay, I'm going to be creative. I'm going to have the kids engaged, so forth and so on. So that's what I'm saying. If people would take the defense down and stop thinking that we're talking about white and black and so forth and trying to make you feel, if they would take and move all of that aside to say, you know what, there's some things that came out of that discussion that's going to make my teaching better. There's some things that I can do here that's going to make my classroom experience and life better. Because at the end of the day, I try to help my staff say, will you please have some fun in that classroom, have fun teaching, and have the students have fun learning? Because there's no reason why in the child's mind, back to the play on words, that they should be bored of education. There's no reason for that. That you can make that class exciting and inviting to the point where it's like, I can't wait to get to Mr. Milner's class today because I don't know what he's going to do next. Yeah, if you set your class up like that, you won't even have to worry about the whole suspension issue or the disciplinary or the consequence issue. You really won't. It makes your life easier. And as you said, teachers and administrators and everybody else, educators, have things going on in their personal lives as well. So if you really want to make your life easier in the classroom, you might have to do some steps or put some things ahead of time, but it will pay in dividends on the back end.
Absolutely. And I would just add that, we've got to, a lot of what you're connecting to there really is about the fact that we've got to relax our egos. As educators,
yes.
Hence the title of the 2010 book, Start Where You Are But Don't Stay There, right? Like, each of us comes to a place where we can grow and learn. Like, if we can get out of the space where we're constantly in a defensive mode, where we're constantly rationalizing poor practice, where we're constantly placing the blame on, well, the parents really don't care, or the parent, right? That's nonsense, right? Because what we know for sure is when the educational system is in place to support all of our children, then every child, I don't care what that home situation is like, right? Every child can succeed. Every child can succeed when we are responsive to what's happening to the children outside of the space. So the ego piece, I think, is really important.
Excellent
I want to talk about one more sort of area that was really tied to race and what students are experiencing, and then moving to recommendations. And it's the racial microaggression. And some of my colleagues, Smith and Yoso and Faison and so forth, they say that racial microaggressions are brief and commonplace daily, verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights and insults towards people of color. And what happens is students are constantly, and people of color are constantly experiencing these microaggressions that shape their psychology, shape their experiences.
Yes.
On page 158 of the book, I provide an example of a high school student, and I'm going to paraphrase. He says, the stuff gets on my nerves.
Right.
The white people follow me around the stores like I'm going to steal the clothes off their backs. The white boys he's talking about, this is a student who actually he's a black student, but he is he's in an affluent classroom. He's in an affluent community, in a mostly white community. And this child, his father is a medical doctor. So just to give you a context, he says, and he's talking about an experience he has in shopping in a shopping mall. He said, the stuff gets on my nerves. These white people follow me around the stores like I'm going to steal the clothes off their backs. The white boys are in the stores and nobody's checking them. It's the brothers they're following around, you know. The stuff gets old. I'm sick of it. And I've been working since I was 12 and saving, and I can buy whatever I want in these stores. But, you know, it's because I'm a brother that they're checking every move I make. And so that gives you an example of the kinds of experiences. And sociologists sometimes will say they're like paper cuts. Like, you know, you're constantly experiencing these microaggressions, and it shapes our psychology. In the classroom, a female student said, it's like whenever I say something in class, the teacher is like, well, that's interesting.
That one I've experienced myself.
Yeah, but that's a...
Keep going.
Man, me too. But when a white student says the same thing or makes the same point, he's like, that's a great point. And I'm thinking, that's exactly what I just said. She always does that. So I just stopped talking, that is, participating in class, because I'm tired of it. Again, another example of how
absolutely
the student is internalizing these racial microaggressions. And again, these are and sometimes these aggressions are intentional, and sometimes, and for the sake of this discussion, they're probably more often unintentional. But these are things that, again, why does it matter?
Absolutely.
Why should not be colorblind? Because your black and brown students are experiencing racial microaggressions.
And again, that's what. Both of those experiences I've experienced. I've had the shopping center one I've had, as well in particular, and you read both of these that day in the presentation. I'm sitting in the seat like, oh my God, I've been there, done that, got the T-shirt, hat, mug, and everything else. In terms of that, as I was working, because I have two master's degrees and the bachelor's, and in both master's courses, at one point or another along the way, I had that experience of the young lady, where, because I tell people all the time, when I was in college, I made sure I always sat front and center, because in many cases I was the only African American in the class, and so I always made sure the professor knew I was there. And in many instances, I'd raise my hand to answer the question, and exactly as she described, the young man sitting right next to me would paraphrase what I just said, or if not say the same words. When I would say it, it was more or less like, okay, yes. The young man or young lady sitting next to me would say the exact same thing, Professor, go crazy. And I'm sitting there thinking exactly, I just said that. Right. That's what I just said. So there's no question
that happens to me, Mark, right now. I'm in meetings that I call. You know, I'm the director of the center, and that happens to me. So
and then the other thing I'll throw into it is, and this, I guess, goes from a psychological experience. I know the other day President Obama said something about racism being in Caucasians' DNA, and everybody got into a flap about it. But the other night I had the opportunity to watch the movie The Butler. I had not seen it, and it was offered on Netflix. And I said, let me check this out, and it was well done. But the opening scene, going back to your microaggressions you were just talking about, and what I'm talking about, I'm wondering, in President Obama's terms, is some of those microaggressions in our DNA. Because the opening scene of that, the slave master takes one of the female slaves who's out in the field with her husband and son. He comes, takes her to the shed. And everyone knows what he's taking her there for. And the little boy is looking like, Dad. And now the man he's caught between a rock and a hard place. Like, I can't sit here and look like less than a man in front of my son, but at the same time I can't go up against the slave master either. So when they come back out the house, the little boy looks at him again like, Dad. And so whenever the man goes to say something, the slave master pulls out his gun, shoots him dead square in the forehead in front of the child. And that's who ultimately winds up being the butler. And so from that point on, the mother was now psychologically gone, emotionally gone. the boy leaves. And so I'm saying all that to say that talk, I mean, that's the ultimate microaggression. But how much of that now has come down into our spirits and into our DNA that whenever we get something like being followed around in a store or being poo-pooed or less than recognized for an answer that your peer just gave, how much of that kicks into play?
Oh, man, I think it manifests and it's pervasive, and I think it becomes so much a part of who we are. Lisa Delpit puts it like this. She says racism is in the air that we breathe, right? So going back to these studies that talk about how students across racial and ethnic backgrounds develop a white bias, right? By the time it is the way that the world works. It's the way the world works. And so students and folks of color tend to react. Again, remember we talked about people are responding to their realities. The people of color respond in one of several ways. They either develop a I don't give a darn perspective,
right?
And they reify the stereotype, to say, almost in a combative way, to say, how dare you? I'm not going to tolerate your nonsense. So I'm gonna reinforce the stereotype that you already have with me.
Correct.
Right? Or another way is they work so hard and they fight against the stereotype, and psychologically it drains our sort of mental and cognitive ways of being and so forth. So for instance, there is a construct called stereotype threat that Claude Steele and Josh Aronson and some other researchers have sort of coined. And Josh Aronson is Claude Steele was the dean of the School of Education at Stanford. He's now, I think, the provost at Berkeley, UC Berkeley. But these are top-notch, top-rated researchers across the country. And their research found that because of these pervasive stereotypes in society, we know the stereotype, and we can either reify it, or we might overcompensate trying to counter or disrupt the stereotype. So, for instance, when you think about black men and achievement, right? Or let's say or black men's ability, or let's say black people's ability to perform on let's say a mathematics exam. Sometimes we act like our students don't hear us.
Right.
Like students, like black and brown. So like I know, and I knew from an early age that as a black man, my teachers didn't think that I was capable as my white peers to be successful. I mean, come on. Like, students hear us. They know what how our beliefs about their abilities and so forth. But psychologically, a student can work so hard to try to disrupt and counter that stereotype. And it's emotionally draining. We call it taxing. There's a tax we pay for trying to combat and trying to address the negative stereotypes and the racial microaggressions that people experience. And so because of that, we as educators, we've got to be mindful that some of the very moves we make, again, from an ego perspective, white educators will say, or white people will say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't do that. Sometimes you don't even realize and recognize.
That's correct.
You are doing things that cause these psychological, and you call the strain. And what happens is it becomes taxing, and then we get to a place where some people, in reaction to these microaggressions, some students, some people of color, experience racial battle fatigue.
Right.
They're just like, I am tired. Fannie Lou Hamer says, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Correct.
And it's just draining. it drains your very being. So again, black and brown folks are working overtime, and Asian brothers, our Asian brothers and sisters, they're working overtime to compensate for, or to overcompensate for the fact that you might see my language as inferior, right? The ways in which I speak. Or they're working overtime to compensate or to overcompensate for the fact that you don't think that I'm as smart or as capable as a white student to do this work. So you can't only concentrate on the academic side, right? Students are grappling with and dealing with and battling this racial battle fatigue, right? So all of these things are educators have to be mindful of, and if we aren't mindful of it, we are just short of being responsive to the students with whom we serve.
It's true. I had a situation, a young lady who was just promoted into administration. She was assigned to me for all of a week before she was reassigned somewhere else. But we had a conversation, and she happened to be Caucasian. She says, Mark, I'm going to tell you. She said, as a classroom teacher, sometimes we can't see why certain actions are being made. But now I'm on the administrative side, I get a better feel for it. But she said, but in the classroom, you just want action taken. And she said, but at the same time, while my experience may not be the same as these children's, I've been exposed to it. And because I've been exposed to it, it is incumbent upon me to be able to figure out how to deal. And that's exactly what you're saying here. And see, this is what I think frustrates me more than anything else, when everybody puts up this block that we keep talking black against white. That's not the issue. Black against white is not the issue. The issue is how, with knowing what you know, do you more effectively relate and communicate? And in the relating and the communicating is where we'll get the results that we're seeking. We're not getting the results because we're not relating and we're not communicating.
Right. Not communicating and not working. Put it in there. This is hard work.
Yes.
The teachers who are most successful across racial and ethnic and gender lines are teachers who work hard at it. Right? This is work. You got to work hard.
It is a calling.
Doing this. It's a calling.
It is a calling.
It's the service. It's the call. It's what we are called to do. I want to make sure I share my email address with folks as well, and my Twitter account, if that's okay.
Oh, we're going to, before it's all over, you can share in terms of if you're doing any book signings, where you're going to be, how they can get the book. We're going to share all of that before it's all. As a matter of fact, let me share some more information with the audience and get all those things done, because the conversation has been so good. I didn't want to break them. I didn't want to break the flow. So I'm going to, while we have a moment, but if you've just joined us, and I truly hope you've been with us since 6, but if you caught us somewhere midstream, the voices you've been hearing, of course, is mine that you hear on Saturday mornings. My guest this morning is Dr. H. Richard Milner from the University of Pittsburgh. He has written many books, been published in several articles and publications. He does professional development. He travels around the country, as well as his duties at the school. So we've been talking this morning about something that is critical that I know many people probably says, first off, they probably think, how much more can we say about race? No, we have to, because the things are still going on. So I'm going to share some information with you. Again, you still have the opportunity to get on your social media sites and say, all right, maybe you missed the first hour and 45 minutes, but you got a chance to catch what we have left. Tell them to do that, because it is that important.
I love you.
To a child, it's just something else to play with. Lock it up, because 1.7 million children in the U.S. are living with unlocked and loaded guns. Get involved at ceasefireusa.org.
Hey, Willie P. students! Need help with a paper? Stuck on a difficult writing assignment? Have no fear, the WPU Writing Center is here. The Writing Center can help you form a thesis, edit a paper, or just organize ideas. Feel free to stop by either of our locations. We're at Atrium 128 and Valley Road 3048. For more information, please check out our website at wpunj.edu/Writing Center. Remember, walk-ins are welcome. We look forward to seeing you at the Writing Center.
How can I make money in the music business? Why copyright?
Should I make a CD anymore?
Trying to break into the music and entertainment biz? Wondering how the business works? Wondering how guys like Elton John and MC Hammer go bankrupt?
Why am I not making any cash?
Tune in to WP Brave New Radio every Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. Hang with the university's music business faculty hosts, me, Steve Marconi.
And me, Dave Phil. Plus, we'll have industry guests and students from the music management program.
How do I get gigs down at the shore?
Call in with your questions and hear the latest in industry happenings.
How do I get my music on iTunes?
How do I get on a tour? It's Music Biz 101 and more every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Only on WP Brave New Radio.
Your secretary's got our checks, right?
Mine's direct deposit, I think.
All right, you're listening to an extended version of the Reading Circle with Marc Medley, heard live each Saturday here on WP 88.7 FM and GoBrave.org, streamed around the world, and then locally New York, New Jersey, as I said, on WP 88.7 FM. My guest this morning is the faculty director, University of Pittsburgh School of Education, none other than Dr. H. Richard Milner. His latest book is Racing to Class, Confronting Poverty and Race in Schools and Classrooms. What we're talking about here is you have to understand what you're dealing with in order to deal with it. So if you're going to go ahead and try to do things based on your experiences and filters, and you're doing those things with students who do not share the same experience and filters you have, then your result is going to seem abnormal to you. The result that you're looking for is not going to sync up. And when that happens, then you think, okay, then that kid's not doing something right. Because as you said, Rich, many kids are sent to the main office for just being kids. Like, that's what a kid of that age, that's what they do. And you're sending them to the office for that. But we're talking. As I said on the phone prior to us going on the air, my sister and I were having this conversation a couple of days ago about there is more racial things going on since Obama has been president than prior. And my sister came up with a theory. She said, let me tell you why I believe all this is going on. She says, when President Obama became president as an African American, he took us out of our natural order of things of what we're accustomed to. So what you're having here is the white folks, for lack of a better term, are still saying, even though that black man is in the chair, we're still going to show you we're in power. So if that power means all of these racial killings or all the police force ramping up and more of us being killed, so forth and so on, then that's what we'll need to do. But either way, back to the ego you were just talking about, either way, we're still going to show you that even though there's a black man in the chair, that we as white folks still are in power. And she said, that's why we have all this racial tension going on since he's been in the chair. Because we've taken things out of what we have always known as the natural order. And see, again, in terms of, as we talk race, if folks would move away from it's me against you and look at it as how do we effectively work together, then we'd be able to move forward. Because you've said it in a couple of different ways in terms of, as Dr. King would say, Martin Luther King would say, what affects one directly impacts us all indirectly. If we would understand that what we do, while you may think, well, that's not in my house, that's not in my yard, eventually, if things don't change, it is going to be your house and your yard. And that's what we're talking about here today when we're talking about race. So
I think I just want to chime in here because I think you and your sister have really sort of nailed and pinpointed some really important points related to the presidency of President Obama, and also as we look across the country at more current sort of race and racialized realities. What I would say for sure is, with all of my admiration for President Obama, what I've come to believe is President Obama has not really been able to be real and to really say what really needs to be said regarding race. I mean, we live in a country where, because of ego and because of arrogance, I would add arrogance to the conversation, that we really we can't have a real conversation.
Correct.
About race. And President Obama certainly can't. He has to be so censored and
correct.
So, because even within our own country, folks are so sensitive and so, and I'm going to say unfairly arrogant about their own experiences and using their own privileges, their own power. It's Beverly Gordon who said, it's difficult to critique the world and work to change it when the world works for you.
Right.
You have folks who are, white. To be fair, to be clear, our white brothers and sisters, they operate from a level of privilege and power that even President Obama
correct.
is not able to penetrate. And so everything that President Obama says, everything that First Lady Michelle Obama says, of course, is looked upon and scrutinized in really unfair ways. This could have really been a moment for us in history. I always
correct.
reflect on the level of connectedness I felt with my country post 9/11. Like right after 9/11, I felt a level of patriotism
right.
that I never felt
right.
in that moment, and I felt a similar way. I thought we would be able to really make us, naively perhaps, some serious strides regarding race and race relations and racism in our country when President Obama was elected. I did. I thought we were going to really, as I reflect on this date, I thought, looking back, that President Obama we would have really been able to make. But the reality is, because of our arrogance, because of our sensitivity,
right.
because white people don't have to engage the tough conversation, because they don't have to make shifts, we find ourselves in a place where we haven't really been. President Obama really hasn't been able to impart the kind of to cultivate the kinds of discourse and the kinds of conversations that could lead to actions. And we know actions.
Correct.
We know discourse is action as well in profound and powerful ways, because everything has to be so censored. We have to, because we're just not willing to engage in the hard conversations. And shame on us again because of that arrogance. Because of the ego, we can't, and some of it as well. When I think about on an educational level, I've had many, many white teachers who've come up to me and said, "I really want to understand race more deeply. I really want to engage in race and racialized conversations, but I'm afraid that when I say something, I'm going to be scrutinized. I'm afraid that I'm going to be seen as a racist, or I'm afraid." And we cannot have those kinds of. Certainly, white people need to be called out and questioned about their positions and so forth. But it has to be done in ways that allows each of us to grow and learn and move. Our mindsets, our belief systems, and so forth forward for the benefit of our children, for the benefit of our students.
There's no question. That's a good segue as we come to a close in terms of, we were talking recommendations. Where do we go from here? What recommendations, what strategies? And then we've been kind of, like I said, cursively talking about them on cursory level. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I really want to make clear that, since Race in the Class has been published, I have been interviewed probably a dozen times. I have been, I've written op-eds. I have done, lots and lots of presentations just since the publication of the book in April of this year. And what seems to be parsed out or teased out from all that I've written and all that I've said about the book that has gotten so much attention has been about conversation, right? This notion that we cannot talk about poverty, we cannot talk about socioeconomic status without having explicit and real conversations about race.
Right.
And that is part of the message. That is part of the message. But there is so much more embedded in what I try to convey, both verbally, interviews and so forth, also in op-eds and in talks I've given. On a classroom level, and this work is about the curriculum. This work is not only about talking among ourselves and making each other feel great from a relational perspective, although that's important. It's also about the humanity, about how we move and address the racism of violence against black bodies, how we address the racism of disciplinary referral rates, how we address the racism embedded in curriculum that does not, as you mentioned earlier, highlight the contributions and the insight and the brilliance of a whole race of people, right? This work is complex. This work is going to take time. Is going to take serious attention to, but we have got to recenter, refocus race, because if we don't, Mark, we're going to find ourselves taking huge backward steps in terms of moving race and racial relations in the country forward. If we're not more serious about, and you can mark my words, and I don't speak in definitive language.
I hear you.
Often like this. If we are not more deliberate about this thing called race, we've not seen anything yet. We don't know what a race riot is, man. We have got to get this race thing right. We've got to do it, but for education, man, where else? Do we have access to the minds and the heart of the brilliance of our students? Yeah, in education, teachers stay as educators, we stay as far away from race as possible. If we're not more deliberate, we are in trouble as a nation. So I want to just move into just a few recommendations. There are lots of them, throughout both Start Where You Are and Race in the Class, but a few, I do want to highlight as I bring the discussion to a close here. The first one really is about class size reduction. And some of these are what can happen on what individual teachers can do, but most of these recommendations are really about developing an ecology or developing a systemic context that allows classroom teachers to do their work more effectively. The research people who study achievement gaps and so forth, the data would suggest that reducing class size really doesn't make that much of a difference in terms of increasing student test scores. I mean, the results are pretty mixed. Common sense would suggest. So most of your listeners, they probably say, yeah, absolutely. If you reduce the number of students in the classroom, then students' test scores should go up. That's not necessarily the case, right? But what we know from good science is reducing class size allows teachers to build those relationships with students. It allows teachers to be responsive to school-dependent students who might be more dependent on school than our other students who might come from, let's say, a higher SES background. It allows teachers to counsel and talk with students. I always say the reduction of class size, you can talk a student off a ledge with 15 students, who might be on the verge of committing suicide. Right. Or for a student who might be thinking about contemplating, dropping out of school or being pushed out of school. So the reduction of class size is critical. We've also got to increase per pupil expenditure. The ways in which, as you know, and your listeners, I hope, know that the money follows the students. So we've got to increase. We've got to provide more equitable ways to support students in classrooms and in underserved environments. So, for instance, if the per pupil spending for one child is $15,000 in one district or in one state, in one district, we should increase the per pupil spending in the most high need environments, right? And so what that means is administrators have more resources, if you will, Mark, to support the kinds of programs, the kinds of initiatives that can propel, and that is accelerate.
That's
we
true.
often conflate equity and equality.
Right.
So what we should be doing is we should be practicing an equitable framework in meeting the needs of children living in poverty. Equality means that we have the same per pupil spending across different need areas. And what we know is we should actually be providing more financial resources to the students. It's not rocket science here.
No, it's true, because the point that you made earlier in terms of the teams, I have, in every plan I've had to submit to central office, I made sure. I always put in there, my particular building, maybe I can't speak for other buildings, but they need a on-site, full-time, everyday sociologist, psychologist, disciplinarian, on and on and on. And I've put that, and of course we're not going to get it, but if we were doing what you just suggested, the money would be filtered that way, right, to do that in particular schools, like you said, not the equality, but the equity. And
you can rationalize it from an equitable perspective. We know that 1 in 5 schools across the country, Mark, for instance, doesn't have a guidance counselor. Think about it. 1 in 5 schools across the country.
That's 20% right there.
Right. Not access. They don't have access to a guidance counselor, right? And so, and when you think proportionally, if you go look at the data, and you can look at these data state by state, I would really encourage your listeners to peruse the Office of Civil Rights website. They have some of the most comprehensive data available for schools. But if you look proportionately in schools in inner cities that serve black and brown students, proportionately what you find is when there are guidance counselors and psychologists and social workers in those environments, proportionally what you find is the proportions are off. So you have one guidance counselor to, let's say, 400 students in inner cities in comparison to, let's say, one guy in suburbs, one guidance counselor, let's say, to 250 students. So proportionally, access to the kinds of support to meet those counseling and those psychological needs, they're off. And so, we know better. We know better, but systemically we aren't making those moves. And to your point, I guess the last point I will make in terms of, I'll make 2 more quick recommendations. One is that we need to increase the human resources and the human capital in every classroom in every school across the country. The research of Pedro Noguera has made this quite clear. He talks about how in some schools, students are struggling and experiencing situations far beyond anything many of us could ever get our heads around. Students who are homeless, and students who are literally raising themselves with no parents in the home, and all these kinds of sort of challenges. Students who have to leave school early to go get in line to get a bed to in homeless shelters. Well, yet these students are succeeding. And they're succeeding because in every classroom there's a lead teacher, there is an assistant teacher, there's a social worker, there's a community member. You have 4 or 5 adults in every classroom. And so I can teach. Here's what we know for sure, Mark.
Right.
Teachers can teach when students are ready to learn.
Yes, indeed.
Right? And so I can teach when when a social worker is working with the social need that a student might have, right? The social welfare of the child. I can teach when the community member is helping the child make links and connections to the church, and connections and links to recreation centers and recreation programs and so forth, right? And economists laugh at me when I make that recommendation. They say, how are we going to afford to put 4 or 5 people? You talk about even reducing class size, right? I want to be clear, Mark. Like we know, we have enough science to know what's necessary to meet the needs of our children.
Right.
We know this. We act like this is the most baffling, it's the most challenging situation, and I don't buy it.
I don't either. I don't either.
We refuse to do it, and that's what I talk about in the book.
Right.
And so economists, they laugh and they say, how are we going to? And my rebuttal is, we can build more prisons.
That's correct. That's correct.
Like we fuel the prison.
Right.
So it is really a moral imperative, right? If we really wanted to transform the ways in which we do education, Maya Angelou says that education is freedom, right? If we really wanted to ensure that every child receives the kind of world-class, cutting-edge education for students to be able to think, right, to critically examine, to analyze, to build on their creativity, to write, to speak, to build argumentation. That's what we should be. It's not teaching Shakespeare.
Right.
It's not teaching a canon, man. It's about a student's ability to read any text.
Correct.
And be able to interpret that text, right? So, I could just go on and on and on.
And see, so no folks know up front we may go the whole 3 because every now and again it happens, and we really can. And you're right. I don't quite understand either why it comes across as such a bafflement, because like if you were doing things like, all right, within the city of Patterson, certain schools have needs that are beyond other schools' needs. And so if you really were to look at it that way and say, all right, I might have to put X amount of dollars here for those extra people because of what happens in that community, to me, that doesn't seem like rocket science either.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
I don't know if it is a refusal or it's just, it's not logistically possible. I don't know what it is. But what makes it just top of mind, common sense to me, is exactly what we were just talking about.
Well, I mean, we know from not only common sense, but it's documented. So we've systemically studied it, and we know that when these shifts are made, our children who are in the most challenging circumstances can and they do thrive. They can and they do thrive, and so it really is about it's about our determination. It is about our will. It is about our commitment. And it's about our moral imperative. It is a moral imperative for us to get this right. It is our moral imperative. And just going back to the point we made earlier, if we don't make huge shifts, we're going to see increased, racial tensions in our country.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't care how much money you have, there's no place to run, no place
to... That's that direct, indirect thing again. That's right.
Just like you said earlier, man, we are in this thing together.
Yes,
we
indeed.
We are in this thing together. So we are deeply tied. We are deeply aligned. And, my question to listeners is really this one. Will we be so arrogant and so sort of egocentric that we won't allow ourselves to grow and to develop where race is concerned to benefit our children?
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to share some information with the audience, and then when we come back, this is the opportunity for you to talk websites and Twitter sites and everything else. But I've been standing the entire time we've been talking. I haven't sat down yet. I've been standing here at the microphone because that's just how much
that's the work. That's the work. That's what it's about.
It really is.
Imagine if we all had that energy and excitement around what's necessary and possible for our children, man. Yes. Yeah.
It really is. And in many cases, like I said, you really do feel like you're swimming upstream. And for me, I'm okay with that, because I don't have a problem with going back against the powers that be and whatever and just saying, no, this is what I believe, this is the direction we're headed in terms of, like I said earlier, a lot of times whenever I'm talking the social things, even the suggestions you made about the churches and everything, when I'm talking the social and the culture and the climate and yada, again, it gets poo-pooed. And I'm okay. I'm like, well, you can keep poo-pooing if you want, but this is the direction we're heading in. And at the end of the day, when we start getting the results, you're going to see I knew what I was talking about. And just to hear, because I've read a lot of documentation, I've read a lot of books on this, I've talked to a lot of people, and just hearing you this morning is more confirmation and affirmation for me that where I'm looking to take the building that I am leading, that we're headed in the right direction. Because I'm with you. If we don't get this right, we really haven't seen nothing yet. And I know for a fact that the community that I serve, like the kids say, turn it up, they know how to turn it up. They know how to turn it out. And if we don't get a hold on that, it's going to be something. It really is. So,
no question.
I'm going to share this because again, I'm going to do the top of the hour stuff, and then because we've been chatting and we go right on past the top of the hour, so I'm going to do what I need to do. And when we come back, you let everybody know how they can contact you if they need you for PD, so forth and so on.
Okay, sounds good.
Wayne, New Jersey.
Part of the William Patterson Broadcast Network. Brave New Radio.
Brave New Radio. Give us your tired, your poor, your hungry, your rockers, your punks, your freaks, your geeks, your Greeks, your party animals, your gangsters, your commuters, your residents, your students, your alums, your lawyers, your truckers, your calls, your tweets. And we'll give you rock, classic, indie, punk, alternative, easy, hard, raps, rhymes, mixes and drops. We'll give you kick-ass music because we're WPSC 88.7 FM, Brave New Radio. Sound good?
I started going cold turkey. Well, at least when I'm in the car.
I know I shouldn't do it, but it's so hard to stop. That's why I hide it from myself, so I won't be tempted.
I used to do it all the time. I stopped by locking it in my glove compartment.
My friend used to do it way too much. Now I turn it off when we're in the car.
My solution is simple. I just don't do it.
There are lots of ways to stop yourself and others from texting and driving. How will you stop? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Straight from the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center, here's your local forecast.
We've moved up to 67.3 degrees. We're going to move to a high of 87. 65 as a low this evening. Then tomorrow, Sunday, 88 as a high, 67 as a low. Monday, 87 again. 66 as a low, and then on Tuesday, 92. We're going to zip up into the 90s, 69 as a low, and on Wednesday, 96 as a high, 70 degrees as a low. For Sunday and Monday, you can expect it to be partly cloudy and mixed clouds, but for today, Tuesday, and Wednesday, expect a lot of warm sunshine. Again, that's the Cliff Note versions of the weather brought to you right here by the WP 88.7 FM Weather Center. I have been having a wonderful discussion, and for those in the listening audience, you've been treated to it as well, as we talk to Dr. Milner in terms of race and how it impacts education and how education can impact race. And that's what we've been talking about, and he's actually offered some solutions, as we just talked in the last few minutes, or at least some recommendations of things that we can do and make. The book is Racing to Class. And as I said, we've been talking on the high level, but you really need to get in depth. And one of the purposes, Rich, for the show was, I've been on the air 14 years now, but the impetus of the show was to increase folks' reading. I didn't care what they read, but you need to read. And so I cover all types of authors. I mean, I tease people all the time and say I cover erotica to Jesus. It scans the, I've had erotic authors, I've had religious authors, educational authors. It scans the gamut, because the hope is that folks will hear the author and then say, you know what, I need to find out more about that, so therefore I'm going to go on out and purchase the book. But this is one really, whether you're an educator or you're not an educator, you need to get this book to understand why race matters, and why race matters in education and how it impacts the classroom, the whole relationships between the teachers and the students and the students and the teachers and the families and the community. It's all connected. And once we begin to start getting into those type of discussions, and then we could start saying, okay, what's the so what of that? What's the now what? What's the next steps? Okay, now that I know this, what are we going to do? When you start having those discussions, then we start getting that growth that Rich was just talking about. But as long as he said, and I'm in 1,000,000% agreement, as long as we keep on with the arrogance and the ego and head in the sand and denial and pretending like it's not an issue, is, as he said, that insanity thing. We're going to keep getting the same thing over and over again. So if you're expecting different results by doing the same old thing or pretending that it doesn't exist, then yeah, that is the definition of insanity, because you're going to get the same old result. And that's what we've been talking about. The book is Racing to Class, RAC, and I always put the emphasis on that parentheses E, ING to class, confronting poverty and race in schools and classrooms. And right now, Rich is going to tell you how you can get a copy of that book, as well as get in contact with him, social media sites, email addresses, and anything else he chooses to share. The only thing, Rich, you can't say is the dollar amount. Anything short of the dollar amount, because they can find that out for themselves when they go to the contact sites. But anything short of the dollar amount, you are free to promote and let folks know how they can get in contact with you and copies of your work.
Well, first of all, Mark, let me take the opportunity to thank you for the platform and the opportunity to speak to your listeners today. I am indeed humbled and honored by it, and I don't take the opportunity lightly. I believe in the work. I didn't even think I was going to be able to. I wondered if I was going to be able to even think at 6 o'clock in the morning, man. But I am so honored for the opportunity, and this work is urgent. I would have gotten up and been happy to speak to you at 2:30, 3 o'clock.
Yes, indeed.
If that's when you invited me to do it, because again, this work is important. When I wrote the book, I wrote the book. And I have to give a lot of credit to my editor at Harvard Education Press, because he really, Doug Clayton, he really pressed me to write to my intended audience. And I wrote this book. My dad drove a forklift at General Motors for 38 years. He then opened a janitorial business, so he's been a janitor. My mother had a beauty salon for many, many years. Hardworking folks are not in education, but I wanted to write a book that my parents could read cover to cover and be energized, that was invigorating, that was encouraging, that was accessible. And so I have written this book in a way that provides solid evidence, but I have written it in a way, and thanks to Doug, that people who are outside of education should be able to pick it up and read it. As Cornel West in his endorsement has said, there are things in it that you may disagree with, but I do believe there are areas that, if we're serious about meeting the needs of every child, and again, I'm not only talking about black and brown children, I'm talking about white children, Asian children as well, all of our children, if we're really committed to the work, man, and I think the book has something in it that will be something that people across different walks of life will find useful. My email address is R as in Rich, R Milner, Milner, at Pitt, PITT.edu. That's R Milner, Milner, at Pitt, PITT.edu. I'm very good on email. I tend to respond to email within 24 or 48 hours at the latest. I do book talks across the country. I do professional development. I think I know that's where Mark and I met. I was doing a talk in Paterson, New Jersey.
That's correct.
I do professional development across the country with teachers. And please follow me on Twitter, Milner H. Rich. Milner H. Rich. That's Milner H. Rich, R-I-C-H. Milner H. Rich. And I'd be honored to have you as a follower. And I also look forward to hearing from you at rmilner@pitt.edu. If you're interested in either racing to class or start where you are, you may go on Amazon or just type in either title, and I'm sure you'll be able to gain access to it, to the book.
Now, if I remember correctly, you have twins, correct?
I do. I have twin girls, identical twin daughters.
I know that's an experience.
Oh man, you have no idea. It's the best work and the most challenging.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, again, and interestingly enough, many of my guests, or a good portion of my guests, actually call in from the West Coast. They're from Los Angeles or San Diego or somewhere, or San Francisco or whatever. And because the show is live, even though I do record it and then send everything out again afterwards, but I generally don't pre-record, that means they are up at 3 o'clock in the morning when they do the interview. So it's not unheard of. And again, it speaks to your conviction. It speaks to your energy and your belief in terms of this must be heard. So if I have to sacrifice that hour or so of sleep, then so be it. I mean, truth be told, Saturday is the earliest morning I get up as well to be to the studio by 6. On Saturdays, I'm up by 4:30. The rest of the week, I'm up by 5:30 or 6 or 6:15 or what have you. But on Saturdays, faithfully, I mean, the alarm clock goes off at 4:20, and I have a routine to make sure that I'm here in time for the show to kick off. But for those of you in the listening audience, I'm going to go back to where we started. If you happen to be Caucasian or white or whatever you want to brand yourself, and you're in the listening audience, you heard what we talked about. If you happen to be black, if you happen to be Asian, if you happen to be Hispanic, if you happen to be whatever, I'm going to go back to what Iyanla said. I will gain more understanding when I realize how I interpret what comes at me is a reflection of what is in me. So if after all the information that we've talked about over the last now almost 2 hours and a half, if you can't take what we've said and then reflect on that and say, you know what, maybe I can at least try to seek to understand or to be understood. At least I can kind of get a feel for, okay, maybe that's not my experience, but I have been exposed. Or at least you might think in terms of, well, you know what? I didn't have to walk over that crackhead to get to school. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't abused. I didn't have no dinner last night and then had to get up the next morning and had no breakfast. Or I didn't have to work a job and try to go to school. So if you can't take all those things into consideration and say, how can then I just don't know, because I agree with Rich 100%. If we can't get to that point, we haven't seen anything yet. We really haven't, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. Ferguson, New York, Baltimore, and all the recent and other things and places that we've seen that are beginning to come. I mean, all kinds of. We just had on yesterday or day before yesterday someone else that went into a theater shooting up folks. It's so if we don't get to that point where we can have a healthy discussion where everybody's not feeling offended or have to feel like they need to defend, because I think the older that I got, the less I could care less about political correctness, because I mean the staff they just don't know what's going to come out of my mouth next. They really don't. When we have staff meetings and observations and feedback sessions and all, they just never know what they're going to do, but they know I'm straight and they know I'm up front, and they do know. And this is the other thing I will say too in terms of our kids. A lot of times folks really do believe that parents and kids in urban areas don't care, that they don't want to be educated, they don't want nothing. And I'm saying that the way I'm saying it, grammatically incorrect, because that's the way they don't want nothing. That's not the case. But I'll tell you this, for every adjective that you describe these folks, if they don't know anything else, they know sincerity. And children know who care about them and who don't. And it doesn't have to be said. It can be by body language, facial expression, sarcasm, all these different things, that microaggression that Rich was talking about. They know. If they don't have a cent at home, if it's that child is homeless, they know. And I'm going to tell you why I know they know, because when I was teaching in the classroom, I got away with all kinds of stuff that they never went to the principal on, because they knew Mr. Medley did that because he loved them. They knew Mr. Medley did what he did because he actually cared. Now, my colleague next door that they didn't feel cared for them, if they did something that they thought was off, they'd run straight to the principal. So kids know sincerity. And they can pick up on the racial thing. Rich talked earlier about, a lot of they walk in the class and you think I'm not going to do anything, so I ain't going to do it. At one point before I went into education, Rich, I worked for AT&T. I worked in telecommunications. And one of my assignments was actually going around the country teaching diversity. And we used to do this experiment where we would hang big Post-it papers on the wall. And we would tell the participants, now look, because we give them all Post-it notes, the little Post-its. We don't want you to write what you believe, but we want you to write anything that you've heard about this particular group, because around the wall would be all groups: Jewish, black woman, black man, white man, so on. And probably 99% of the time around the country I went, those little yellow Post-it notes were the same. And when we had the big poster board for athletes, a lot of times folks would put on their dumb jocks, so forth and so on. So again, 9 times out of 10, there would be an athlete in the room. They would say, let me tell you something. I have my doctorate in this. I have a PhD. I have a master's. I have this, that, and the other. And I was a student athlete. I was an athlete. And I'll tell you, because everybody thought we were dumb, we'd act dumb. So the research bears that out. People would begin to act as their label. So I'm saying all that to say, as teachers and educators, we need to understand the labels that we put on folks and how they will react. And the better we get in terms of all of this, the better off all of us are going to be.
And I can't say it any more clearly or any clearer than you said it. And I in terms of thinking about the outcomes and so forth, we know, and in terms of expectations, we know the strongest inside-of-school predictor of academic achievement is curriculum rigor. And what that boils down to, Mark, is teacher expectations.
Right.
The expectations that students will live up to your expectations, and they'll live down to them. And so I'm not surprised when you talk about students who sort of buy into or act out what is expected of them. It bears out. It bears out in the literature.
There's an exercise, and I don't know if you've ever done it before, but I've done it a few years. An opening staff day, I've done it. It's one of the fishbowl exercises where you put, in the inner circle is a certain number of people, and then there's another certain number of people in the outer circle. And the exercise goes like this: you blindfold the participants in the inner circle. And no, you don't blindfold. I'm sorry. You put on their heads a label. They don't know what their label says on the top of their head. Because what you do is you take a piece of construction paper, you write a label, they want to make it like one of the little crowns like when you're a kid. You make it one of those and you put it around their head. And each participant in the inner circle has a different label on their head, but they don't know what theirs says. And what you do is you pass out a sheet of paper that has an assignment. You're going to plan the holiday party this year. This is the committee. And what you tell each person is you have to treat the person in the committee, in the circle, like what their label says. And the exercise goes on for 5 to 8 to maybe 10 minutes. And the labels might be something like stupid, lazy, special ed, smart, intelligent, leader, whatever label you want to put on folks. And they have to treat each other like the label. And Rich, the people on the outside of the circle, has to watch the people on the inside of the circle to see how they begin to respond as they're putting their plans together. So let's say, for example, the person that has the label on their head says lazy. And now they pipe up with a suggestion of what they're going to do on the committee. And everybody around the inner circle says, oh, yeah, right. Yeah, you're going to do that? I'll bet you won't even be it. Mm-hmm. You have to see within 10 minutes that people begin to start acting like the label. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the exercise, they have to figure out, what label do you think was on your head? And they usually say it must have been something like stupid. It must have been something like it must have been something like smart. And then we start dissecting and say, well, why did you feel that way? But because the person that had lazy or dumb or never on time, whatever, they literally would say, I began to shut down. Mm-hmm. And we say, well, if you shut down in 10 minutes, what do you think that kid is like for 180 days?
That's right. Yeah, and I think even having teachers experience that and thinking very seriously about how that manifests, how it shows up in their own practice, I think is essential. I think it's important, and it's the one step towards moving towards curriculum transformation.
Right.
One of the challenges I find in the work I do is people think it's only about relational. It's only about, and so teachers will say, well, I love all of my children. I treat them all the same, which of course is problematic. They'll say that I don't have any challenges with from a relational perspective. All of my children get along. They but it's not only about the relationships. Relationships matter, but it's not only about the relational piece.
Right.
It's also about how do you transform the curriculum in ways that allow students to be connected to the curriculum.
Correct.
How do you make students understand that this world is not only about materialism.
Right.
It's not only about acquiring and getting their own in this competitive, world in which we live. It's about helping students understand and become individuals in the world who can be transformative to others.
It is, and that is a great way to end, because education is about changing lives, it's about changing communities, it's ultimately about changing a world. And that's what we've been talking about this morning. So, Dr. Milner, I can't thank you enough. I always make the disclaimer in terms of the recording equipment. Generally, it works pretty good. There might be some gaps in it, this, that, and the other. But if everything worked the way it should work, I will be transforming this into a YouTube link. It'll be an MP3 link that I transfer into a YouTube link, but I will email you a copy to that. You can do whatever you will with it. It's yours. And I look forward to us chatting, and maybe every now and again I may email you and bounce an idea off you and so forth or whatever. And if you ever come back to Patterson again, you are more than welcome to come to the Dr. Frank Napier Jr. School of Technology. I'd love to have you as a guest. So,
man, I just want to salute you and just I really want to encourage you to continue the great work you're doing, providing this platform and really being real about what our children are experiencing and what's necessary for us to support them. So I salute you. I'm grateful again for the opportunity, and I would expect that I hear from you.
Oh, you will.
As you move forward, man. And and to any of your listeners, I look forward to following up and clarifying or substantiating, any of the points that have been made today. So again, I thank you for the opportunity, and I will be tuning in now that I know about the station in the future, man, and paying it forward.
I appreciate that as well, because we have some educators coming up. I have Dr. Barbara Blackburn. She's coming up. She's talking about rigor in the classroom in September. And I have some other educators. I have former NFL players coming up. Burgess Owens, that was back yesteryear on the Jets. He's coming up, and he's talking about we're all a team in terms of race issues and everything else. And so there's some exciting folks coming up. So, yeah, I encourage you to do that. And make sure you tell Rosita and Glenn that you are on. I'm sure they're listening, but if not, let them know we made this happen.
Absolutely.
And to your family, I wish you all nothing but the best.
Yeah. Okay. So sounds good to yours as well, and enjoy the remainder of what we have of the summer.
I know that's right.
Going back and go back. Our children need you.
All right. Take care now.
All right.
Bye bye. That's all I can say to that is wow. I can't encourage anyone enough. Because, see, everybody thinks when you start talking race that you're naturally talking about hate. And actually, it's just the opposite. Really, when you start talking about how can we relate better, that's about love. And if we could kind of understand that it's not about me hating you because of what color you are, or you hating me because of what color I am. If you start understanding that, then we can begin to move forward. But every time we put up this defense thinking that because I'm trying to put you on a guilt trip because you white, or you trying to put me down because I'm black, and every time we get into that struggle, that's why we don't go anywhere. So I agree with Rich 100%. The book is Racing to Class, Confronting Poverty and Race in Schools and Classrooms. H. Richard Milner IV is the author. I encourage you to get the book.